Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today I am writing my review for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Normally I don't review games like this until I've played them inside and out and upside down and backwards. However, this time I decided to play it like a normal human being instead of an Australian bat. Not sure if that joke makes any sense, but from where I'm sitting the orientation seems correct. In any case, at the time of writing this review I've played the game for exactly 141.8 hours, and I've done everything. I've played the entire story, I've done all the side content I could find, and I've maxed out all the skills. And I've learned all the tricks, visited all the points of interest on the map, you name it. I've explored the game. Now, that is not to say that I have no interest in continuing. The game has branching storylines, and it would take at least 2 carefully thought out playthroughs to actually experience all of the variables in a satisfying and organic way. That is to say, I don't want to just reload saves and try each option before moving on, as that takes all the fun out of a choose-your-own-adventure narrative. So it's safe to say that, content creation aside, I still have another 80 to 100 hours of natural organic gameplay to get out of this game to thoroughly enjoy it all. But it still feels like this is the right moment to review the game, as I have reached the point of familiarity in it where I no longer wonder what is, or where it may be. I know where it is. I know what to do, I know where to go, and I know where things are, when things will happen, and the motivations behind the narrative plot beats. So, let's get to it. When reviewing games, I typically like to start off with performance, as it's the most objective metric and is therefore the most straightforward to critique. Unlike things like writing, art direction, voice acting, and world design, it's not really subjective at all. Sure, there is leeway that you can give a studio for many reasons, say if it's their first game or if they're pioneering a new system, but at the end of the day, it is really just a simple question. Does the game work? And in this case, the answer is simple. Yes, it works. Technically speaking, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 works better than the first game ever did. In the year of our Lord, 2024, I played a half-dozen brand new games at launch, some by very large AAA studios, and several that were in development far longer than KCD2, and my nearly 142 hours in this game were all done before the pre-release version of the game. That is to say, before the large day one patch. And that's another way to say that I'm not playing the finished version of the game. And still, it is easily the smoothest game that I've played for at least a year. I had exactly 3 performance issues the entire time I played Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The first was missing textures that appeared during a cutscene relatively early in the story. Without spoiling anything, some soldiers showed up at a tense and dramatic scene, and instead of having the carefully crafted, detailed medieval armor, they were wearing bright pink, formless blobs of clothing that roughly resembled human bodies. This was a one-time occurrence, and it never happened again. But it does exist in the footage I recorded for my official playthrough, and will exist as a testament to the shockingly few glitches that I encountered. The second issue that I encountered was late in the game in the city of Kuttenberg. I started to experience periodic stuttering and frame rate drops. I theorized this was due to the persistent inventory system being used by the traders within the city. My theory is that Warhorse didn't want to repeat the simulated economy of the first game, where over time you could make traders very wealthy by increasing their cash supply, to the point where you could sell them hundreds of thousands of groschen worth of armor and weapons after a heavy loot run. In the old system, the inventories would refresh after 3 in-game days. Any items not coded to that NPC's inventory would be erased, and their groschen value would be added to the merchant's inventory. In the new system, they replenished their original inventory, plus whatever you sold them stayed, and they would once again have the same amount of groschen as they did before you sold them anything. I assume this system is to prevent groschen farming to keep the player feeling poor. This makes narrative sense, but for me it feels infinitely less realistic and immersive, and also has the side effect of causing large technical issues. See, all of those assets, instead of being erased, are kept in persistent inventories. This stacks until there are so many assets in the already large packed city that the game simply cannot handle generating that many instances, and it collapses under its own weight. I tested this, and I was proven right. My test was to run around one night, robbing every single store of everything they had, and then waiting in my room in Kuttenberg until the stores refreshed. On the 3rd day of resting, the game stuttered, froze, and crashed. presumably at the moment when the stores refreshed their inventories and regenerated them, and the game could not handle simulating that many assets in the city at once. The third technical issue I experienced was during the climactic battle. This one I do not have a clear explanation for, it just happened at a moment of heavy engine load, and I had already been playing for roughly 6 hours that night, so it could have been cumulative. But in essence, a large battle was taking place with a few dozen NPCs fighting at once, and the game dropped in frame rate down to less than 10 FPS, and I stuttered through for a few minutes until moving to a new area and the issue resolved itself. Now, all in a row, that may sound like technical performance was not up to snuff. However, this could not be further from the truth. As I already stated, I was playing an early, unfinished build of the game, and in over 140 hours, only experienced 3 noticeable technical issues. I would say, comparatively speaking, that makes Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 one of the best performing games I have played in recent years. Moving on to something brief, and something that I forgot to mention in my first impressions review, and that is the soundtrack for this game. Jan Valta and Adam Sporka, the same team behind the award-winning soundtrack from the first game, have done it again. The music in this game is truly phenomenal, and I say that with no caveats. I don't mean for a video game or for modern music, I mean it stands apart. There are few musical pieces that I believe will stand the test of time, like a lot of classical music has. Amongst them, I include much of Howard Shore's music from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, several compositions of John Williams, like Duel of the Fates, Hedwig's theme, Binary Sunset, or the theme from Schindler's List. Many of the songs from the original game, and now this one, are truly phenomenal examples of extraordinary modern orchestral and choral music that are truly a pleasure to listen to. They are also perfectly drafted into the game. They strike a perfect balance of storytelling and ambiance, never overpowering or distracting, only ever enhancing and emphasizing, as a good score should. This is another area where I have no notes. It is so well done that I do not believe it could be improved at all. Gameplay is an area where the game makes or breaks the experience. Personally, I love it, but I'm a longtime fan of the first game and did not go into this game blind, as I have the first game memorized. I struggle to recall or remember the dates of my loved ones' birthdays, but I can tell you exactly where to get each sword in Kingdom Come Deliverance. And even still, the game does an excellent job of making you feel like a fish out of water in the new world. I'm probably the worst test subject for the experience, and I found myself running soon enough, but the game had me stumbling a few times, and that is an achievement. This is something I absolutely loved. However, this disorienting feeling may throw some people, and all I can say is, if you find yourself feeling that way, don't stop. Trust me, you will get into it. You're supposed to feel that way. That's a feature, not a bug. In other gameplay aspects, the game acts surprising to a veteran such as myself, but also in a pleasingly predictable way. Combat has been dramatically improved, so much so that I believe it is totally ready for hardcore mode in a way the first game never was. Don't get me wrong, the hardcore mode in the first game was fun, but the flaws in the combat system made certain aspects of it enraging. The combat still is a little bit slow, but it is immensely better than the first game. Strikes are far smoother, faster, and the response time is dramatically improved. Far too often in the first game, you would get locked into animations or inexplicably unable to do anything, because despite the fact that you could rarely execute a combo, enemies could do it all the time, and once they did, you had no recourse. This game has done away with that almost entirely. In fact, other than early game biting off more than I could chew, I have yet to have a bad combat experience. Sure, sometimes you get surrounded and die, or barely escape, but it always feels like the right outcome. Medieval armor makes you very well protected, but knights could still be overwhelmed, and in reality, it's difficult to fight 2 people at once, and pretty much impossible to fight 3 or more at a time. Anyone who tells you different has never actually been in a real fight. All I need now is hardcore mode to bring me no slow motion at all, as well as no blocking warnings, and I feel the combat, especially the longsword combat, will truly achieve greatness. The game also introduces aspects like the new smithing minigame, which is simplistic yet serviceable, and also dramatically improved old systems like Alchemy. Now, I do have a bone to pick here, and it's the absence of an auto brew perk. In the first game, once you got to a high enough level in Alchemy, you could unlock a perk in the Alchemy skill tree that allowed you to auto brew a potion if you had already successfully crafted it once. This was a good system, because you still had to level Alchemy first, which meant plenty of of time using the minigame, and you had to manually brew each potion at least once after getting the perk to use it on those potions. This struck an excellent balance, so everyone experienced the system, and those who love it and prefer the immersion could continue to use it, and they had benefits like receiving extra potions for doing it manually. And those who found it boring or tedious could then work towards a way where they didn't need to participate in it. Although it's a small thing, I do personally think it was a mistake to remove it, and I will be watching for a mod to fix this at some point. To wrap up gameplay, I feel that I can say the game is just a refinement of the original. Every system that existed almost universally still exists and works very similar to the way it did in the first game, just benefiting from many years and thousands of hours of beta testing. The minigames are smoother and better implemented. The armor system has somewhat narrowed its breadth, but has been deepened dramatically. The horses are more varied and feel more realistic, with different types being differently suited to different uses. The dialogue is very similar, but much larger in scope. In the first game, most conversations were very straightforward paths, with very little room to stray. Typically, either every question and response were required to proceed, or only one relevant path existed, with other obviously irrelevant one-offs as alternative options. This game's dialogue rewards the attentive player. Sometimes, without warning, you will be asked a question about something from earlier in the conversation or given options to choose that will anger the person that you're talking to, and you would have recognized that if you were paying attention. There are also tons of timed responses, so you have to choose a reply quickly, and sometimes in very important situations. It adds the urgency of the story and each interaction in a very meaningful way. The open world itself is massive. It's hard to accurately compare, but the first region, which is centered around Trotsky Castle, is roughly the size of the entire first game. Now, it's more rural as a region than the Rete-Sisao region, but it is massive nonetheless, and that's not to say it's empty. There are 8 distinct locations in the Trotsky region, and many scattered small settlements around the countryside. Quite a few quests, and lots of secrets and treasures to discover. And what's more, the map is tiny and empty compared to the Kuttenberg region. Roughly 30 to 40% of the way through the story, possibly less, you go to the Kuttenberg region, and it is huge. Riding from one side to another takes 2.5 forevers, and there is so much in between. Unlike the first map in this game, or the original map from the first game, the Kuttenberg region is not very rocky, so it's fairly easy to traverse cross-country. It is simply so massive that even riding in a straight line, life feels a little bit shorter having made the trip. This works well to the game's benefit. The actual time and distance involved in map traversal makes it much easier to play the game regionally, to get involved in one area and learn it really well before pushing on to another. It makes exploring the world feel rewarding and natural in a way that few games actually achieve. And it's important to note that once you've gone to the Kuttenberg region, you can travel back and forth between the two maps at your will. I am not planning on spoiling anything for anyone here, but I am about to discuss the story as the last part of this review. So if you want to go into the story blind, I do suggest leaving now before I start talking about it, because despite my best attempts, I may inadvertently spoil something, and I would hate to ruin the experience for you, as I found it to be thoroughly enjoyable, and I want the same for you. However, that was your spoiler warning, so now let's get into it. The story of KCD2 is much larger in size and overall scope than the first game. As you likely know, it includes several original characters from the first game, but also introduces some new real-life historical characters who play a huge role in the game. Henry is still the main character, and you will spend the vast majority of your time playing as him, much of which alongside the bold Sir Hans Capon, whom you should be quite familiar with if you've played the first game, or if you paid attention to any of the promotional content for this game. However, as you also may know, some of your time will be spent playing as Father Godwin, a side character from the first game. The reasons for this are tied to the narrative, so I won't go into detail, but it does come up several times. These experiences are more on the rails. As Godwin is not your character, you can't control him like you control Henry. That is to say, his clothing, skills, inventory are for the most part set, and you have very little freedom to change them. And you can't go off into the open world with him, as your time playing as him will always be locked into narrative set pieces. And that brings me to arguably the largest weakness in KCD2's story, and that is the reliance on narrative set pieces. Now, I understand why this method was used, and I found it to be effective. Several times within the game, you will have a couple quests locked together where you have to play through, and the open world becomes unavailable to you while you do so. This is because the narrative flows through them, and for immersion you can't tap out and return. This makes narrative sense, but it happens quite a bit, and on 2 occasions goes on for quite a while. I enjoyed it because I'm a huge fan and was very invested in the story, but for people who don't like long cutscenes and conversations, these narrative set pieces could be very tiresome. Other than that, I can say for the most part the new characters and the lesser known returning characters are pretty much all developed well. Godwyn is fleshed out somewhat, although still feeling somewhat hollow for a character that we actually play as. Hans Kapan has a large arc, and really grows through the story. We see more of some old bad guys from the first game, one of which includes what I assume is an optional interaction that is extremely well done, and actually succeeds in making the player question the narrative that Henry has bought into for so long. And as a historian, I love that, because the real history of the region and the conflict between Sigismund and Wenceslaus is nowhere near as simple as the game often makes it appear. Some new characters in the game really shine as well. I won't name them all or give too much detail, but most are aware that Jan Žižka is in the game. This I can confirm, and he is probably my favorite character. But I also know a tremendous about him historically, so every little thing to do with him is fascinating and entertaining because of all that extra context. There are some stereotypical plot beats that I saw coming from a mile away, that made me wish I was streaming the game while playing it for the first time, so I could show off my perceptiveness. But alas, that's the core downside of playing a game like this early. Overall, the story satisfies very well. It strikes a much better balance than the first game between immersive medieval mediocrity, epic battle and adventure, intrigue, romance, and being a part of history. Again, if this sounds vague, it's because I fear spoiling the game for you, so I don't want to be specific about anything in particular for fear of ruining it for you. So, let's rate the game. Overall, at the time of writing, having not played the final release of the game, nor any of the planned DLCs, I would rate this game an extremely solid 8.5 to 9 out of 10. It is as good as any game I have ever played. This ranks in the same tier for me as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, Red Dead Redemption 2, and the first Kingdom Come Deliverance game. A game that I can wholeheartedly recommend to any fans of medieval history, open world games, or any story-driven action RPGs. And that concludes the review. Now I would like to briefly address the controversy surrounding the game regarding quote-unquote wokeness and forced DEI inclusion. If that's of no interest to you, feel free to click off now, but I have received a lot of questions about this, and I want to address it in detail for those that are interested, and I'm going to do so now. If we are defining wokeness as shoehorning modern 21st century political ideology and dogma into a setting where it does not belong, then I would say the game is not woke. I will confirm 2 things. Yes, it does appear that if you pursue it, you can make Henry engaged in a romantic and potentially sexual relationship with other men. I did not pursue these paths, so I don't know what they look like, but several times when interacting with Hans Kapan, it felt like the game was offering the option to cross over the line between platonic friendship and a sexual relationship. I also noticed the same with a character named Bartok in the first area of the game. Ironically, one of these bothers me much more than the other, and we'll get to that in a bit. I would say that historically speaking, it isn't inherently inauthentic to have a homosexual relationship be possible, especially because there is no indication in the game that it would be socially acceptable, and presumably would be entirely secret, which is the reality of what it would have been actually like at the time. There is no praise of homosexuality in the game, or any characters being looked up to or considered stunning or brave for simply being gay. So I would say this inclusion does not constitute wokeness in any way. It's a very common feature in role-playing games and is totally optional. I do strongly dislike that the option is there at all with Hans Kapan specifically, as I feel their relationship was a perfect opportunity to showcase strong platonic male friendship, which is something that modern media rather dramatically lacks these days, but I still do not find it to be woke. On the other charge that people keep bringing up, that being the inclusion of a character named Musa of Mali, that is totally accurate. The screenshot you have seen is authentic. The character exists in the game, and the dialogue from the screenshot also exists in the game. He is a foreign scholar/medic that can be found in Sigismund's company, and he can have a limited or somewhat involved presence in the late game story, depending how you interact with him in a mission somewhat late in the game. Now, I'm unaware of any specific historical evidence of a sub-Saharan African scholar from Mali traveling to Bohemia in the 1400s, but as I have said in the past, it's certainly not impossible, no matter how implausible it may be. In the story, he feels like an authentic character. He's an outsider. He has a plausible reason for being there. His presence is explained in what I consider to be a reasonable way, and he's treated in what I would consider to be a fairly historically authentic manner. Again, I'm not going to state that it's realistic for him to be there, but I do want to highlight that it's in no way impossible for him to be there. And from a narrative point of view, it doesn't actually hurt the story at all. I understand that these inclusions feel extraneous, and therefore in this modern climate, it feels natural to react to them harshly. I cannot say whether they are forced DEI inclusions or not, as I'm not affiliated with Warhorse Studios or their parent company PlayOn. All I can say is that, as a historian and a fan of the first game, they did not negatively impact my experience in any meaningful way, nor upset my specific sensibilities. So that's my long way of saying, yes, those two things do exist in the game. No, there is no unskippable gay sex scene, as the entire option is entirely optional, and I didn't experience it at all. My Henry played through the entire game entirely straight. The game could surely exist without these elements, but even with them, it delivered a thoroughly enjoyable experience. If you feel the need to skip the game, that is a perfectly rational choice. As someone who is also frustrated with modern media and having IPs that I care about ruined for no reason, I can empathize with that reaction. However, in this case, I do not think it is totally justified, and I think the campaign against the game was instigated and fueled by people interested in seeing the game fail, or those that are simply farming outrage, not by fans and normal gamers. But that's where I'll leave it off for today. I hope this review was useful and somewhat entertaining, but it's over now. So I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.